Allegedly.
What is it? What is your preference? Their preference is control.
Right.
No principles, no values. This is what we continually point to. We want to see a continuum of values. Okay, we're going to listen. If you're watching us on YouTube, Whitney Webb's joining me now, an investigative journalist renowned for her work exposing Jeffrey Epstein. We're going to be talking to her right now over on Rumble. It's not the kind of thing we can talk about on YouTube. So click on the link in the description and then come all the way through and join us on Locals, where we'll be following your stuff. Okay, Whitney, are you there? Whitney, are you there? Where are you, Whitney? In Chile, inside a grandmother's handbag, as usual. Thanks for coming on, Whitney.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me back on.
Have you got a baby again?
What do you mean by that? I have a 1.5-year-old. So
I feel like last time we spoke, Whitney, we had like a long conversation, and then sort of it became clear, not early enough in the conversation, that you'd been like looking after your baby the whole way through the interview. Like when my children come in here, which they did earlier, like you'll see bits of that actually, because it was a show we did. Like it was just absolute chaos. Your child was very well tended to.
Yeah, my toddler is getting his molars in right now, so it's definitely chaotic in some senses, but otherwise very fun and entertaining.
I like you, Whitney Webb. Like Whitney, our audience are well aware that that when having a conversation with you, it's best to do it in a free speech environment. We're in particular interested in talking about Bill Gates's relationship with Epstein. Now, look, even on a free speech platform like Rumble, I guess what I really want to know is this: if you're friends with Jeffrey Epstein, does that mean that you're definitely involved in nefarious activity related to sex trafficking, sexual assault and abuse, that crazy island stuff? Does it mean you're necessarily involved in corruption? Does it?
So I think you have to keep in mind, Epstein is a guy that was also really involved, for example, in financial criminality. Suspect fundraisers and sort of this broader effort to redefine philanthropy, move it away from how it's been considered by the public for a long time as altruism to a new model where it's really impact investing disguised as philanthropy. It's all about return on investment. And that's why you have him so closely involved with the Clinton Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which are really institutions that were created in this period where that shift was happening, and Epstein was a key part of it. So more often than not, the people that tend to go to Epstein tend to be looking, I think, not necessarily so much for the sex trafficking stuff, though there obviously are those cases. But I think the financial ties are very significant, because even the people that were, discussed in this new Wall Street Journal expose, they admitted, we went to Epstein for his wealth and connections. It was about money. And this is a guy that, if you look at his history from the time he was at Bear Stearns to the time he was involved with shadow finance and arms deals with people like Adnan Khashoggi and all these, suspect intelligence ties in that period, then going to very suspect Clinton White House fundraisers, visiting the Clinton White House 17 times, and being tied up with, the biggest campaign finance scandals of the Clinton administration, and then going on to get involved with philanthropy. I mean, there's a very particular reason you'd seek out someone like Epstein, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
So, like, the trafficking was almost like a side hustle. There's a lot of financial impropriety also. Gal, I saw our co-host, on-screen assistant, I can't remember what we call Gareth these days, but certainly he's integral to the show. Gareth, I saw you had a very big reaction to what Whitney was saying.
I just thought that was so fascinating, the kind of rebranding of altruism into philanthropy as we now know it, and the ways in which we're told it's one thing. And obviously, I didn't realise he was such a key figure within that, and that makes a lot of sense, but it's really fascinating.
He's central to that, all that, and I bet, that trend, that's all of the ESG stuff. Is it ESGs, like the way of categorizing blue chip companies so that they have social credit score type stuff going on, or ways of gaining additional credit through their ecological or sociological moves? That seems like a way of capitalizing literally on certain social justice ideas that are good. That's why they have a certain gravitas, but are not legitimate in these contexts. And the biggest example of that is these sort of phony philanthropy organizations that do appear to have connections with the Clintons and the Gates Foundation. I see. Can I just ask you this? This is more of a personal thing. Say someone like Noam Chomsky, who I really, really like, when he's meeting up with Epstein, is there any way of like meeting up with Jeffrey Epstein that is legit? Or is it if you've met with Jeffrey Epstein or been on that airplane, it ain't a good look, full stop?
So the Chomsky situation is interesting. Well, it's also a little complicated because Chomsky himself hasn't been very forthcoming about why he would meet with Epstein. But actually, before these revelations in the Wall Street Journal, Epstein was very open before he died about why he was interested in someone like Noam Chomsky. He gave an interview in 2017 that was published later in Science magazine. And there he said that the reason he invited Chomsky to his townhouse was because he was interested in talking to Chomsky about artificial intelligence specifically. And this is, I would argue part of Epstein's big focus in MIT specifically, where Chomsky has long taught and been affiliated, and particularly with MIT artificial intelligence initiatives. So I think with Chomsky, a lot of it was apparently related to that. Now, the question is, how much did Chomsky really know, about Epstein? Because keep in mind, some of the meetings that he was known to have with Epstein weren't just with Epstein. They were with people like Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, who was very, very much involved, if you look at the evidence, with aspects of the sex trafficking operation. And then you also have him going on a dinner meeting, I guess, with Woody Allen and his wife. And of course, Woody Allen is very controversial for his alleged molestation of Mia Farrow's adopted daughter. And then he ends up marrying another one of Mia Farrow's adopted children, allegedly getting involved with her when she's around 17 or 18. So there's a bunch of weird stuff there. I don't have the answers about Chomsky. I wish he would have given a less evasive response to the Wall Street Journal. He essentially told them that his meetings with Epstein were none of their business nor anybody's, which is not the kind of response I was personally hoping for from Chomsky. But he was very evasive and defensive in his response. So
I can see that I'm not immune to the problem of it when it's someone that you're predisposed to like Chomsky or Woody Allen, people I think are contribute to the culture in various ways. Like I'm like, oh no, but when it's like Bill Gates, I'm like, aha. But you think that Bill Gates's connections are much more likely to be about setting up apparently philanthropic organizations that have great influence. It's very interesting to see those kind of ties, because I guess what it is Epstein is like an outlier of when people in spaces like this say, hey, there's all these sort of secret connections and there's all this corruption that goes on, financial, and there's a sexual component to it. Like Epstein is like someone that emerges that appears to have these things written down. That's kind of, I guess, what he represents. Is when you have such a deep knowledge of a figure like Epstein, what do you think his significance is? Why do you think he died in prison? Why did he have meetings with the CIA director, William Burns? So does he have deep state connections, big finance connections? What does he represent, Whitney?
Okay, so I wrote a 1,000-page book about Epstein and his deep state connections. They are very significant. They are very disturbing. And a lot of it essentially intersects with some of the things that are being promoted right now in terms of technocracy, artificial intelligence, digital ID, all sorts of these types of initiatives. Epstein was on that beat very early on, over a decade ago. And but even before that, he was involved with this power nexus, sometimes referred to as the enterprise, back in the Iran-Contra era, and essentially stayed affiliated with aspects of that throughout the years. And in my opinion, he was a serial financial criminal. And it's not quite clear exactly what the extent of his financial crimes are, but from what we do know, it is pretty significant. And I think this would go back to sort of, his earlier ties with Bear Stearns, and this where he was allegedly a bounty hunter for finance, hiding and finding looted money for powerful people. This is a guy that was an expert in the shadow banking system. And I think, after he did it in the 80s with these suspect arms deals, and then sort of offered similar services to the Clinton administration, he went on and started developing, offering those services to a host of powerful people, including Silicon Valley, for example, and all other sorts of powerful entities. And I think, frankly, the mainstream media has really done this story an injustice by focusing almost exclusively on the sex trafficking ties and not on really any other aspects of Epstein and what he was doing, because there's really a lot more to find. And, my work is a testament to that, but other people as well have dug up a lot on what he was involved with.
A lot of people in the chat over here on Locals, you can join by pressing the red button on your screen, are fascinated by your work. Georgie Gal, among many others, are asking for the name of your book. We're going to post a link to your book right now in the chat, so you can get that if that's what you're interested in.
Fascinating what you just said, Whitney, because it does seem like, as you say, whilst Jeffrey Epstein stays in the realm of, the kind of sex crimes and the more lurid parts of his history, we're not focusing on the financial elements of it. And you could even suggest that maybe when you're talking about altruism rebranded as philanthropy, which is ultimately about power in the case of, for example, Bill Gates, maybe it's almost more convenient that this still remains within the kind of more lurid elements that can be kind of dismissed as conspiracy, rather than the focus which should come from the media on the financial elements of all this. Where was this money? What were these, financial arrangements that were going on? Why is it that, what's kind of most relevant about these recent revelations, and why won't the media focus on it?
Yeah, what is most relevant? And can I add to that, do you believe the positioning of Epstein primarily around the sex trafficking, do you believe it's strategic? And as Gareth says, Gareth's question about what is most significant about the recent revelations, if I may just add.
Yeah, so I definitely think it's a strategic effort to limit the what is acceptable discourse about the Epstein case. And as far as the financial ties go, a great example going on right now is the J.P. Morgan Epstein case. So a lot of focus has been on these revelations in the Wall Street Journal. But what hasn't been talked about as much is that there's been 4 billionaires subpoenaed as part of this J.P. Morgan Epstein case, including Thomas Pritzker, who runs the Hyatt Hotels Corporation. And he is in Epstein's black book, written next to his name is numero uno, number 1. That's a pretty odd thing to have next to your name. And the Pritzkers are very much tied to the Democratic Party. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where William Burns, who was Joe Biden's pick for CIA director that was meeting with Epstein, he met with Epstein right before he went from essentially being Hillary Clinton's deputy at the State Department to the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, which Penny Pritzker runs, who of course is related to Thomas Pritzker. And the Pritzkers, as I note in my book, are essentially this very powerful clan out of Chicago who were responsible in a large part for Obama's presidential and Senate career, and have historic ties to organized crime going way, way, way back to like the 30s and 40s, and all sorts of very suspect activity that helped essentially cement their position in Chicago politics, which is pretty notoriously corrupt if you're familiar with political history in that part of the country.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, I'm just saying then that Gareth is astute to point out that the financial corruption is much more significant because it points to, as you say, Whitney, continually in your work, the nexus of power. There's some pretty big names getting dropped there. So is it potentially strategic to amplify the more salacious aspects of this case in order to distract from the fact that Epstein and the revelations that you have presented us with are the flying saucer on the White House lawn of deep state corruption?
Yeah, I think that's fair, because if you look at some of this information coming out, as particularly of the J.P. Morgan case, there's a lot of powerful people that are potentially on the hook for enabling his sex trafficking crimes, particularly Jamie Dimon, one of the most powerful bankers on Wall Street. So, I mean, that's hugely significant in and of itself. And again, some of the other people that have been subpoenaed as part of that case, the 2 co-founders of Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and apparently Larry Page is so concerned about being served papers in this court case that he can't even be found. They've tried 5 different addresses and can't find him anywhere. And that's really astounding when you consider the ties of Google to the CIA from its founding, its collaboration with mass surveillance, and the fact that the New Albany company, which was incorporated by Jeffrey Epstein, owns the land on which major data centers for Google, Amazon, and Facebook sit on. And no one's talking about that stuff, because at the same period of time that happened, Epstein was setting up this insane DNA data mining company that he called a biomedical Google. in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and he wanted to sequence the genes of all these young Virgin Islanders, and he started funding education initiatives for like little kids and teens. Very suspect when it's Epstein, right? Because he wanted them to basically run servers for this company for him, and he wanted to train them from an early age on. I mean, there's so much crazy stuff here, and as you start picking away at it, I think it becomes really clear why they're focusing so much on his sex crimes. And again, it's not just his sex crimes, as they occurred over the course of his lifetime and career. The mainstream media focus is specifically on sex crimes from 2000 to 2006. And there's no discussion of what Epstein, well, very little discussion of what Epstein was doing after he was arrested the first time, and what he was doing around the time he was arrested the second time. Because I think it's fair to say that the Department of Justice of the United States wasn't interested in justice for Epstein victims when they arrested him and, helped cover up his apparent murder in 2019.
Wow. I mean, when I talk to you, it's a little like talking to RFK. Like that, it makes me realize that this is deep. Like that, even some of the more contentious stuff that we've talked about on YouTube, the pandemic, the exploitation, the media manipulation, the funding of politics, in a sense, is sort of necessary to remain there. It's necessary because you can kind of demonstrate it in a way that's, I don't know, it feels, what do I want to say, sort of somehow simple and plain. When you start going, the Google, CIA, they own the land, you start to feel like, oh my God, this is enormous. We're in a sort of prison. We're being held in a sphere of managed reality, and true power is completely inaccessible, and you're not participating in it at all. Things are much further gone than you would dare anticipate, and they sort of, in a sense, they sort of cut your fingers off as soon as you reach anywhere near it. You sort of go, hey, something weird going on there, and they cut you off, but there's so much further to go. There's so much further to go. Our conversation with RFK was like that, Whitney, where you just sort of hear someone in the same sort of easy manner, someone that's obviously done a great deal of research, someone that's obviously done a great deal of journalism and has a great deal of experience, and I actually think it's terrifying. That's why I start to, at some point, feel a kind of, like we said, that we were joking about it before, like in A Few Good Men, it goes, when Jack Nicholson cracks and goes, you can't handle the truth. And you go, oh, shit, no, actually, I don't think I can. It's a bit heavy. Can I just go back to sleep in the Matrix, like the bloke who wants to go back and eat steaks, rather than being there with Neo and Morpheus and Trinity and Whitney getting your nuts kicked on a daily basis by the depth of the corruption. We need independent media. Not only that, this independent media needs to become a kind of activism, because there are powerful, nefarious, deep, malfeasant forces at work. Whitney, have you looked at much at RFK's stuff? Do you like him? You don't have a little bit of rivalry, do you, of who could be the most extreme person trying to bring down the state?
No, definitely not a rivalry. We've actually met. I spoke at the Children's Health Defense Conference last year, which was their first conference, and I was really happy to meet him. I think he's a great guy, and I hope that his campaign, the DNC, particularly in the primary stage, is known for committing fraud to keep people they don't want out. Or keep the wrong person from getting the nomination, right? So what I hope, if that same fate befalls RFK's campaign, I hope he can raise awareness among a large segment of the left that has sort of been, a lot of Democratic voters have been apparently, hypnotized to become increasingly authoritarian over the past few years, supporting war, supporting big pharma, supporting corporations, and this public-private partnership model, which is really, if you go back to how the majority of Democratic voters were back in the George W. Bush era, I mean, they're practically unrecognizable. So I hope that RFK can help, wake some of those people up.
I hope so, because a move to tackle an opponent, an establishment, an elite this powerful, you're going to need allies from all sides. You're going to have to put aside previous partisan, it don't mean anything anyway. I like this party. It's all made up, you lunatics. You're believing in nothing. You're believing in nothing. Awaken, awaken. It's really difficult to sort of remain sanguine about it, because it induces in me an almost hysterical fear to see the scale and scope of their power, and also the sort of casual bureaucratic manner in which it's sort of conducted and exercised. We were saying now that, like, because there is legitimate, justified mistrust in most institutions, whether it's judicial or media or electoral, that after the next election, whoever wins it, the other side's just going to go, well, they cheated. You know, there's no, in a way, the institutions are dead, even according to their own framing. Do you think that?
Well, I think the situation in the United States right now, voting is not going to solve the problem. I think for a long time, culturally in the United States, people have been conditioned to look for a political savior and assume that one man can fix all of the problems that the United States has. And I think, and as my work shows, the corruption is so longstanding and so systemic that it's really going to take a mass movement of people divesting from that system and building something parallel in order to really fix what's going on in the United States.
Bloody hell.
It's very complicated, but I think that's, essentially what we're seeing is a major effort to force everything in the world into the digital realm as part of the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. At the same time, governments around the world, including in the UK and the US, are pushing to exert complete control over that digital realm. We're seeing that with censorship, but it's only going to get worse from here. If you look at the policy papers from groups like the Webb or the Carnegie Endowment and a lot of these other entities that are very intent on setting policy, particularly for the West. And I think people really need to be aware of what the problem is, because if you don't understand the scale and scope of the problem, it's very hard to understand the ways to fix it at the end of the day. So, some of the stuff may be harrowing and maybe, upsetting to some people, but it's better to know what's actually going on and, understand the truth of the situation, because without that, we can't change anything for the better, in my opinion.
We're getting a lot of love for you, Whitney, over in Locals. You can join our Locals conversation right now by pressing the red button on your screen. Zypher 2000. One thing can fix this country. Actually follow the Constitution. Jack Swiss _ like Rumble is a parallel. Oh, what, you think we're not a parallel? Hold on a minute. I think we can say what we like on here. I am me. What I'm saying is if you did say what you like, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair. To quote Noam Chomsky, maybe for the last time. And then there's some people like Blessed Old Bird citing the Bible, talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel 2:20-23. You can join us there in the best little place to exchange theories. The Locals chat is going on right now. Some great memes. They're just having their own fun in there. Whitney, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation inside your own grandmother's handbag. I like to imagine that Whitney has been shrunk down to a tiny being. She's in a handbag with her toddler and their molars. Just
Tic Tacs or
mints, if that
Imperial
shot
mints.
came wider, you would see some tiny little Tic Tacs. Like Tic Tacs are like that big as Minions.
Old tissues.
She's next to her nan's handbag, like a cell phone that's that big, and you see brr, brr, Bill Gates' his name flashing on there. I'm coming for you. That's enough out of you, young lady. Thank you so much, Whitney. We've posted Whitney's website in the chat. Whitney Webb, thanks, man. I'll just say thank you to you once more instead of being silly.
Thank you. No worries. Take care.
Thanks, man. Whitney Webb is the author of One Nation Under Blackmail, and you can follow her work at the Unlimited Hangout. There is a look at it now. Now, we're going to ask you guys in the chat. You've got some options, right?